Hi everyone, this is Ashley with CT Nina Digitals. I'm going to do a tutorial to show you how to use my new floral hoop swings and seats in Photoshop. I put swings and seats on there because some of them have chains or something that they are hanging from, so it's more of a swing, and some of them don't have that, so it's more of a seat. Some of them are going to have a fabric already on the swing, some of them don't. So if you're looking to use one that does not have the fabric already there or draped across it, just make sure when you're shooting your subject that you have them sitting on something with fabric so you can Photoshop that in. I have opened the image that I am going to use. This is probably going to be a little bit of one of my longer tutorials because I did not shoot the subject for the specific backdrop. And it is a little bit darker that I'm photoshopping her onto than the original image. So first I'm going to come over. I don't want to flip my subject and my light's coming from a different direction. So I'm first going to unlock my layer and I'm going to just flip my digital backdrop so that the light is coming from the same direction. Did I just flip that? It was coming from the same direction. Okay, never mind. Losing my mind just a little bit. I think, was it? Okay, no, it wasn't. All right, not losing my mind. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select my full image first because I'm going to do all the editing on the digital. So select all, edit and copy, and edit and paste into my image. As you can see, my digitals I did for this one are 8:10 ratio, and my image here I think is like 2:3 or 4:6. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click this up here. When I have my move tool or my selection box here selected, I'm going to come up here and select this so that my image keeps its proportion. As you can see, if I uncheck that, it's going to kind of do whatever it wants, and I don't want that, so I'm going to make sure that's checked, and then I'm going to lower the opacity on my layer here just so I can see the swing behind her. Actually, I think this one's a C, it's not hanging, just so I can kind of resize and see where I'm going to want to place her on the image here. You might need to play around with that a little bit before you get it to where you want it to be, and I think that looks good right there. So I'm going to bring that opacity back up. I'm going to come over here, so I want to select my subject from the original backdrop, so I'm going to come over here to my quick selection tool and select subject up here at the top. You can also use your contextual taskbar if you'd like, or however you like to select subjects in your image. Wait for that to work and just check my selection here. I'm just gonna use your plus and minus up here. I'm gonna use my minus to just take away that little area right there that it's selected. Everything else looks pretty good. So I'm going to duplicate that layer and then create a layer mask. And then I'm gonna take my digital backdrop layer here and I'm gonna drag it in between. So now as you can see, my subject needs a lot of editing to get it to blend in, but it's what the tutorial's for, but she's placed where I want her on the digital backdrop. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my layer mask over here, my layers, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to clean up the edges of my image. Feel free to fast forward through this part if you'd like. I'm going to be using a soft brush, but I'm going to be using a very small soft brush, so my edges aren't too sharp, but I also want them sharp enough to where it's not like adding a haze around her body when I paint the image back in. Okay, so I'm using white to brush on if I need to, if the selection took any of her body out. Go ahead and paint that back in. Paint this back in. And now as you can see, so I'm going to press X on my keyboard. That's going to switch between my black and my white layer because I want to brush away some parts too that didn't get brushed off. Tattoos, Photoshop has a tough time with tattoos, I think. Being able to tell whether it's a tattoo or whether it shouldn't be in the image or not. Okay. So I did have her on a white backdrop, so I did want to select a lighter backdrop. That way I don't have to mess around with the hair or really paint off and on too much. Most of the editing is going to be my shadows, since my shadows are going to be a little different going from white to a darker backdrop. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you brush off some of the original wrap, as long as it still looks good, that's all that matters. So I have this white outline around the whole part there. I'm going to use a bigger hard brush, to brush off those areas, because I don't want a white line. So we're going to darken this leg up over here. And this is another reason why you want to try to get it to match. If this was a white backdrop right here, I wouldn't have to paint off all this area, but in order to get it to match and blend for this image, this is what we need to do. And this is the way that I choose to do it. I know there's some other ways that you can remove kind of a halo using other ways in Photoshop. So I'm going to show I'm going to paint back in this part of the leg too, because in the initial image she was sitting on a box, so it kind of that part of her leg was kind of hidden. And I'm going to paint that back in as well after I'm finished with my edges here. Okay. Use a bigger brush here. Sometimes I like to take a little bit more off and then paint it back in, because it helps me to do a better line there. Sometimes I use like a tablet to edit with my pen too if I am having trouble with my hands being steady enough. I want to get rid of this line too, this white. And I'm going with the contour of the original wrap because I do want it to look realistic. So I'm going to blend that the same way that the original one was. Oops, paint on her toe, not off. Okay, all right. Zoom out real quick. And now I want to paint back in that area of the leg real quick. So I'm going to just grab a big brush, and you probably won't have to do this for your image, but I have to because of how my original image was. So I'm going to paint back in how her original leg would be if that box wasn't covering it. Okay, and then I'm going to click on the actual image. I'm going to go up to my clone tool. Use a small soft brush here. Oh, clone tool, not my brush. There we go. At 100% opacity. I'm going to paint in that edge here. And then I'm going to use my healing tool to fill that in. Okay, and now since she's still, since there's still an edge right here, I'm actually going to keep that original shadow on her leg. I'm just going to clean up the blotchiness a little bit. Also going to come back over, grab my hard brush, and I'm going to clean up the leg just a little bit here because there's a sharp edge of white. Round out her calf just a little bit. Okay, so now if I zoom out, the first thing I notice is that there's a lot more contrast on the digital backdrop than there is her. So I'm going to go to my adjustments and I'm going to add some brightness and contrast to her. And I'm going to create that clipping mask by clicking right there so it only applies to her and not the digital. And I'm going to add some contrast in there, and I'm also going to bring down the brightness just a little bit so I can get her to match a little bit more to the digital. Okay, and now I also want to make her leg a little bit darker over here because as you can see, her leg's kind of falling on this side in the shadows, so we want to add some more shadows to her leg. I also want it to appear that her foot is behind these florals right here. So I'm going to come down to my layer mask and I'm actually going to brush off her foot around these florals. Zoom in. Use a soft brush to brush it back in there, just around those florals. Okay, now I'm going to create another layer above that image. I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard and click right between these layers, or you can right click and create clipping mask because this is work. Oops, this is work that I'm going to be doing to just her. I don't want it to affect the backdrop at all. I'm going to change that the blending mode to multiply on that layer. I'm going to grab a soft brush. Play around there, and then I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard and I'm going to select the shadow part of her leg, and then I'm going to paint in some shadow, lower my opacity just a little bit there. I'm going to create another layer, but I'm going to click on this first layer first, so when I create it, it's already creating a clipping mask because I'm in between these layers. If you keep creating above, you're going to have to keep changing the blending, or you're going to have to keep creating that clipping mask. Change the blending mode to multiply, and I'm going to paint some shadow on this side of her leg too. Okay, so the shadow is good on her leg there for now. I might go back in and tweak it a little bit. Now I'm going to do some shadowing on the digital. So I'm going to come down, I'm going to create a layer above the digital backdrop, create that clipping mask, right click, you can right click and do it too. Change the blending mode to multiply. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to grab a dark part of hold down Alt on my keyboard, grab a dark part of the gray there, lower my, and then I'm going to paint in some more shadow over here. Lower the opacity just a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna create another one. Again, click on the initial layer first and then create one. That way you're not having to create that clipping mask every time. I'm gonna paint in some shadow under her leg here. And I'm brushing all the way up here because I don't want to paint right on. I'm feathering it onto under her leg. I'm feathering it so it doesn't look so copy and paste. And as you can see, I need to clean up that leg right there once I'm done with this. I'm going to create another. I like to do my shadows on different layers. That way if I mess up, it's a lot easier to go back and correct certain layers instead of having to remove all of them. I'm going to, excuse me, make my brush smaller. I'm still at 100% opacity here. And I'm going to brush a very thin line under her leg to create that shadow between her leg and the fabric. This is a big mistake that a lot of people make, is they try to paint on these huge shadows and a lot of time you only just need that shadow of separation. If you mess up, create a layer mask and use a black brush to just brush it back off. And then make sure you click back on your layer to continue painting the. I'm just going to feather that. We need to clean up the toes. Brushing on the shadows will show you where you need to fix your layer mask. I'm going to create another layer, new shadow layer, multiply blending mode. Create a little bit of shadow under her leg. Not a lot because the light's coming from that direction, so there's not going to be much shadow created there. Okay, I'm going to come back up to my layer mask on my subject, and I'm going to clean up the spots that need cleaned up here. So now with that shadow there, I can see that I need to brush that off right there a little. Shadows and lighting is the most important part of doing digital composite work. If the lighting's off, none of it's going to look right. Just going to brush off that part of her thigh to get rid of that original. Okay, all right, zoom out here. And now I'm gonna lower the opacity. Let me bring this up a little bit here. I'm gonna grab hold down Control on or Command on my keyboard, and I'm gonna select all of those layers that I just did. And I'm going to bring down, not on those ones, just these ones. And I'm going to bring down the opacity on that line just a little bit. Here we go. Okay, now I'm gonna do another layer above her to do more shadow onto her leg. Multiply blending mode. Now again, I'm gonna want to hold down Alt on my keyboard and select a shadow on her skin. Make my brush a little bit bigger here, and then feather again. I just want to add a little bit of shadow on her leg as well, because she was sitting on white before, so she didn't have much shadow casting back onto her leg. But with this gray and a darker color, you're gonna have a little bit of shadow kicking back. Not much, but more than white. Okay, zoom out there. I'm going to create a layer mask on that. Use a black brush. Brushed a little bit too much on right there. Okay. Now I want to add a little bit more shadow to her whole leg right here too. So I'm going to create another layer, multiply blending mode. I'm going to select that shadow on her leg. And then I just want to add, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to lower the opacity down and create a layer mask and kind of feather that down. So you can see that just made that leg a little bit darker. Okay. All right, now I want to add a little bit more contrast just in her leg portion because a lot of white was reflecting off of that original wrap. So I'm going to create another layer above this layer, another contrast layer, and then I'm going to bring up the contrast and down the brightness a little bit, and then I'm going to press Control or Command if you're on Mac +I on my keyboard to invert that layer. And then I'm going to use my white brush at 100% opacity, and I'm just going to brush that in where I wanted that to kind of take effect there, because I didn't want it on the whole image. So I'm just masking it in here. Let me zoom out so I can kind of just show you what I did. That was just on this portion of the leg there, and then I'm going to lower the opacity. It was a very subtle change, but a big one in my opinion. Okay, right here on her leg, you can see where the white was kind of reflecting back onto her leg there, but now we're on gray, so I'm going to create another layer for shadow. Multiply blending mode. I'm going to grab this shadow on her leg because I don't need a dark shadow, and then I'm going to brush that in. Okay, lower the opacity just a little bit. See how now that blends a lot better sitting on the gray. She's not sitting on that white anymore. Okay. I'm going to add a tiny bit of blur to the digital. Select my digital here, go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. 1.5 is good. I don't want it to be a lot. I just want it enough to add a little bit of separation between her and the backdrop because I want her to be the focus. I could add in a little bit of shadow, probably right here, but the light is coming from up here. So this wouldn't have too much shadow on it, but I am going to create a little bit. So I'm going to create a new layer, multiply blending mode. I'm going to select this dark pink and just add a tiny bit of shadow on to that. You always want to select the shadow, the color of the shadow that you're trying to paint onto. Like I'm not going to select like a pink shadow and then paint it onto like the greens down here. You want to reselect a green shadow to paint green shadow onto that color. Okay, and now if you're happy, I'm happy with my shadows and the way that I blended this in. Actually see another little part. I want to add a little bit more shadow right here coming off of the foot. And that's going to be on the backdrop. So create another layer here, multiply blending mode. I grab that color. Bring the opacity down. I just want to add, create a layer mask and feather that in just a little bit. There we go. I just wanted a little bit more here behind her foot. Okay, and now if you need to do any more editing to her or your subject, you can, but I like the tones and everything in the image here. Do see a couple more shadows I want to paint onto the backdrop here. Right back here behind her foot. Okay, and a little bit more shadow on the back of her ankle there. Okay. And now if I was happy with this, I would go ahead and I'd flatten the whole image. And I'm going to grab my blur tool. I don't do this every time, but when I have like right here, I'm going to just the very edge of her leg. I'm going to blend my seams here just to get that fall off that you would have originally from the camera, so she does not look copy and pasted into the image. And this is just where you want it to blend. Like, I'm not going to do this to her face or her hair, just the edges of her body where there would be a fall off of that blur if she was originally photographed on this backdrop. I'm not going to touch her upper body anywhere, or her arms, maybe a little bit right there on her shoulder. It would fall off a little bit of her hair. But just go around your image. Anything that looks a little bit copy and pasted, just add a blur on the very, very edge of that. Okay, and now in my sample image, I did color change her wrap here to this gray color. I'm not going to do the full thing because that would be like a totally different tutorial. But in order to do that, if you're going to do that, you would just need to duplicate my image here. You want to always duplicate your image, so you're doing work on a different layer. And then I would create a new layer. And then I'm going to come down to my background layer here. I'm going to grab my quick selection tool, and I'm just going to select the wrap. Oops, plus here, not minus. And it's going to select a lot more. Okay, take away from that. Take away her foot. We don't want to color change her foot. Doesn't need to be perfect because we can add to it, but get it as close as you can. And then duplicate that layer, create a layer mask. And then this layer up here, I'm going to add a clipping mask. Again, you can right click and create clipping mask too, but I hold down Alt on my keyboard and click between those layers. And then I'm going to grab the gray right here, hold down Alt and grab the gray. And then I'm going to paint it onto the wrap here. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to go through my blending modes and see which blending mode works best. Works best for what I'm trying to accomplish, which I would probably do linear burn for this one. But as I said, you can go through and you can see how all of them look. But I would probably do linear burn. And then just lower the opacity until it kind of matches the wrap below. And then you would just paint in and then create or come down here to your mask here. So if I'm not going to paint in the whole thing, but I'm going to show you how you would just fix up the edges. Come in here and then come down to your layer mask. As you can see, there's a lot that needs cleaned up. You would just use your black and white brush, soft black and white brush at 100% opacity, and just brush off and on until you get all of your edges cleaned up here. And that's going to take me a lot longer, but I just wanted to show you the gist of it in case you see my before and after in my sample photos. That's how I did it. That's how I just changed the wrap here, the wrap to the wrap color up here. And then sometimes I like to add a filter or some kind of something to the overall image to kind of tie the whole thing in together. If you feel like you need to do any editing on her, or maybe add like a little bit of dodge to her face. I didn't mean to do that you always duplicate your layer because I'm going to want to change the opacity on that. Add a little bit of brightness in there because the flowers down here are pretty bright. So I want that to match a little bit on her face. There we go. That looks a lot better. And another thing I like to do, you can create a solid color gradient over the whole image. If I wanted to do like a warm tone, and then I only do it on, it's literally only a few %, but it kind of, it's over the whole image. So it kind of gives the whole image a little bit of the same hue to tie the digital in with the subject. But obviously that's completely optional. That's just something that I do as well. If you do change, again, if you're going from white to a darker color, like I did for this wrap, this little part of her belly right here has like kind of a little bit of a highlight on it from the white wrap. I would want to darken that part of her belly too, since now, just like I did on the leg over here, since I was going from a white wrap to a darker gray wrap, I needed to add in that shadow bounce. I would need to do the same thing to her belly there. But that's it. That's a little bit longer of a tutorial, a little bit because it's a little bit harder of a digital to use and blend. You obviously have to photograph your client or your model sitting down in order to use these, unless you're just having them just photographing them standing in front of it. That's obviously an option too. But if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. If you are a studio photographer, I would love for you to join my group on Facebook. I will link that in the description. If you want more free tutorials like this one, please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel to be notified when I add new videos.